Babe Ruth is my 14th cousin. George Herman Babe Ruth was an American professional baseball player whose career in Major League Baseball spanned 22 seasons from 1914 through 1935. Nicknamed the Bambino and the Sultan of Swat, he began his Major League Baseball career as a star left-handed pitcher for the Boston Red Sox, but achieved his greatest fame as a slugging outfielder for the New York Yankees. Ruth is regarded as one of the greatest sports heroes in American culture and is considered by many to be the greatest baseball player of all time. In 1936, Ruth was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame as one of its first 5 inaugural members. At age 7, Ruth was sent to St. Mary's Industrial School for Boys, a reformatory where he was mentored by Brother Matthias Boltlier of the Xaverian brothers, the school's disciplinarian and a capable baseball player. In 1914, Ruth was signed to play minor league baseball for the Baltimore Orioles, but was soon sold to the Red Sox. By 1916, he had built a reputation as an outstanding pitcher who sometimes hit long home runs, a feat unusual for any player in the dead ball era. Although Ruth twice won 23 games in a season as a pitcher and was a member of 3 World Series championship teams with the Red Sox, he wanted to play every day and was allowed to convert to an outfielder with regular playing time. He broke the Major League Baseball single-season home run record in 1919 with 29. After that season, Red Sox owner Harry Frazee sold Ruth to the Yankees amid controversy. The trade fueled Boston's subsequent 86-year championship drought and popularized the curse of the Bambino super sensation. In his 15 years with the Yankees, Ruth helped the team win 7 American League pennant and 4 World Series championships. His big swing led to escalating home run totals that not only drew fans to the ballpark and boosted the sport's popularity, but also helped usher in baseball's live ball era, which evolved from a low-scoring game of strategy to a sport where the home run was a major factor. Ruth hit 60 home runs, which extended his own Major League Baseball single-season record by a single home run. Ruth's last season with the Yankees was 1934, and he retired after a short stint with the Boston Braves the following year. In his career, he led the American League in home runs 12 times. During Ruth's career, he was the target of intense press and public attention for his baseball exploits, for drinking and womanizing. After his retirement as a player, he was denied the opportunity to manage a major league club, most likely because of poor behavior during parts of his playing career. George Herman Ruth Jr. was born on February 6, 1895 at 216 Emory Street in Pigtown neighborhood of Baltimore, in a house which belonged to his maternal grandfather, Pius Schomburger, a German immigrant and trade unionist. Ruth's parents, Catherine Schomburger and George Herman Ruth Sr., were both of German ancestry. According to the 1880 census, his parents were both born in Maryland. His paternal grandparents were from Persia and Hanover, Germany. Ruth Sr. worked a series of jobs that included lightning rod salesman and a streetcar operator. The elder Ruth then became a counterman in a family-owned combination grocery and saloon business on Frederick Street. Only one of Ruth's 7 siblings, his younger sister Mamie, survived infancy. Many details of Ruth's childhood are unknown, including the date of his parents' marriage. As a child, Ruth spoke German. When Ruth was a toddler, the family moved to 339 South Woodyear Street, not far from the rail yard. By the time he was 6 years old, his father had a saloon with an upstairs apartment at 426 West Camden Street. Details are equally scanty about why Ruth was sent at age 7 to St. Mary's Industrial School for Boys, a reformatory and orphanage. However, according to Julia Ruth Stevens' recount in 1999, because George Sr. was a saloon owner in Baltimore and had given Ruth little supervision growing up, he became a delinquent. Ruth was sent to St. Mary's because George Sr. ran out of ideas to discipline and mentor his son. As an adult, Ruth admitted that as a youth, he ran the streets, rarely attended school, and drank beer when his father was not looking. Some accounts say that following a violent incident at his father's saloon, the city authorities decided that this environment was unsuitable for a small child. Ruth entered St. Mary's on June 13, 1902. He was recorded as incorrigible and spent much of the next 12 years there. Although St. Mary's boys received an education, students were also expected to learn work skills and help operate the school, particularly once the boys turned 12. Ruth became a shirt maker and was also proficient as a carpenter. He would adjust his own shirt collars rather than having a tailor do so. Even during his well-paid baseball career, the boys aged 5 to 21 did most of the work around the facility, from cooking to shoemaking, and renovated St. Mary's in 1912. Food was simple, and the Xaverian brothers who ran the school insisted on strict discipline. Corporal punishment was common. Ruth was sometimes allowed to rejoin his family or was placed at St. James' Home, a supervised residence with work in the community, but he was always returned to St. Mary's. He was rarely visited by his family. His mother died when he was 12, and by some accounts, he was permitted to leave St. Mary's only to attend the funeral. How Ruth came to play baseball there is uncertain. According to one account, his placement at St. Mary's was due to his part to repeatedly breaking Baltimore's windows with long hits while playing street ball. By another, he was told to join a team on his first day at St. Mary's by the school's athletic director, Brother Herman, becoming a catcher, even though left-handers rarely play that position. During his time there, he also played third base and shortstop, again unusual for a left-hander, and was forced to wear mitts and gloves made for right-handers. He was encouraged in his pursuits by the school's prefect of discipline, Brother Matthias Boltlier, a native of Nova Scotia. A large man, Brother Matthias was greatly respected by the boys, both for his strength and for his fairness. For the rest of his life, Ruth would praise Brother Matthias, and his running and hitting styles closely resembled his teacher. Ruth stated, "I think I was born as a hitter the first day I ever saw him hit a baseball." The older man became a mentor and a role model to Ruth. Biographer Robert W. Creamer commented on the closeness between the two. Ruth revered Brother Matthias, which is remarkable, considering that Matthias was in charge of making boys behave, and that Ruth was one of the great natural misbehaviors of all times. George Ruth caught Brother Matthias's attention early, and the calm, considerable attention the big man gave the young hellraiser from the waterfront struck a spark of response in the boy's soul that may have blunted a few of the more savage teeth in the gross man whom I have heard at least a half dozen of his baseball contemporaries describe with admiring awe and wonder as an animal. The school's influence remained with Ruth in other ways. He was a lifelong Catholic who would sometimes attend Mass after carousing all night, and he became a well-known member of the Knights of Columbus. He would visit orphanages, schools, and hospitals throughout his life, often avoiding publicity. He was generous to St. Mary's as he became famous and rich, donating money and his presence at fundraisers and spending $5,000 to buy Brother Matthias a Cadillac in 1926, subsequently replacing it when it was destroyed in an accident. Nevertheless, his biographer Lee Montville suggests that many of the off-the-field excesses of Ruth's career were driven by the deprivations of his time at St. Mary's. Most of the boys at St. Mary's played baseball in organized leagues at different levels of proficiency. Ruth later estimated that he played 200 games a year as he steadily climbed the ladder of success. Although he played all positions at one time or another, he gained stardom as a pitcher. According to Brother Matthias, Ruth was standing to one side laughing at the bumbling pitching efforts of fellow students, and Matthias told him to go in and see if he could do better. Ruth had become the best pitcher at St. Mary's, and when he was 18 in 1913, he was allowed to leave the premises to play weekend games on teams that were drawn from the community. In early 1914, Ruth signed a professional baseball contract with Jack Dunn, who owned and managed the minor league Baltimore Orioles, an international league team. The circumstances of Ruth's signing are not known with certainty. By some accounts, Dunn was urged to attend a game between an all-star team from St. Mary's and one from another Xaverian facility, Mount St. Mary's College. Some versions have Ruth running away before the eagerly awaited game to be punished and then returning to pitch St. Mary's to victory as Dunn watched. Others have Washington Senators pitcher Joe Engel, a Mount St. Mary's graduate, pitching in an alumni game after watching a preliminary contest between the college's freshmen and a team from St. Mary's, including Ruth. Engel watched Ruth play, then told Dunn about him at a chance meeting in Washington. Ruth, in his autobiography, stated only that he worked out for Dunn for a half hour and was signed. According to biographer Cal Wagenheim, there were legal difficulties to be straightened out as Ruth was supposed to remain at the school until he turned 21, though a Sports Century stated in a documentary that Ruth had already been discharged from St. Mary's when he was 19 and earned a monthly salary of $100. The train journey to spring training in Fayetteville, North Carolina in early March was likely Ruth's first outside the Baltimore area. The rookie ball player was the subject of various pranks by veteran players who were probably also the source of his famous nickname. There are various accounts of how Ruth came to be called Babe, but most center on his being referred to as a Dunny's Babe or some variant. Sports Century reported that his nickname was gained because he was the new darling or project of Dunn, not only because of Ruth's raw talent, but also because of his lack of knowledge of the proper etiquette of eating out in a restaurant, being in a hotel, or being on a train. Babe was, at that time, a common nickname in baseball, with perhaps the most famous to that point being Pittsburgh Pirates pitcher and 1909 World Series hero Babe Adams, who appeared younger than his actual age. Ruth made his first appearance as a professional ball player in an inter-squad game on March 7, 1914. He played shortstop and pitched the last 2 innings of a 15-9 victory. In his second at-bat, Ruth hit a long home run to right field. The blast was locally reported to be longer than a legendary shot hit by Jim Thorpe in Fayetteville. Ruth made his first appearance against a team in organized baseball in an exhibition game versus the Major League Philadelphia Phillies. Ruth pitched the middle 3 innings and gave up 2 runs in the 4th, but then settled down and pitched a scoreless 5th and 6th innings in a game against the Phillies the following afternoon. Ruth entered during the 6th inning and did not allow a run the rest of the way. The Orioles scored 7 runs in the bottom of the 8th inning to overcome a 6-0 deficit, and Ruth was the winning pitcher. Once the regular season began, Ruth was a star pitcher who was also dangerous at the plate. The team performed well, yet received almost no attention from the Baltimore press. A third major league, the Federal League, had begun play, and the local franchise, the Baltimore Terrapins, restored that city to the major leagues for the first time since 1902. Few fans visited Oriole Park, where Ruth and his teammate labored in relative obscurity. Ruth may have been offered a bonus and a larger salary to jump to the Terrapins when rumors to that effect swept Baltimore, giving Ruth the most publicity he had experienced to date. A Terrapins official denied it, stating it was their policy not to sign players under contract to Dunn. Competition from the Terrapins caused Dunn to sustain large losses, although by late June the Orioles were in first place, having won over 2/3 of their games. The paid attendance dropped as low as 150. Dunn explored a possible move by the Orioles to Richmond, Virginia, as well as the sale of a majority interest in the club. These possibilities fell through, leaving Dunn with little choice other than to sell his best players to major league teams to raise money. He offered Ruth to the reigning World Series champions, Connie Mack's Philadelphia Athletic, but Mack had his own financial problems. The Cincinnati Reds and New York Giants expressed interest in Ruth, but Dunn sold his contract along with those of pitchers Ernie Shore and Ben Egan to the Boston Red Sox of the American League on July 4th. The sale price was announced as $25,000, but their reports lowered the amount to half that, or possibly $8,500 plus the cancellation of a $3,000 loan. Ruth remained with the Orioles for several days while the Red Sox completed a road trip and reported to the team in Boston on July 11th. Babe Ruth married Helen Woodford on October 17, 1914, although Ruth later claimed to have been married in Elkton, Maryland. Records show that they were married at St. Paul's Catholic Church in Ellicott City. They adopted a daughter, Dorothy, in 1921. Ruth and Helen separated around 1925, reportedly because of Ruth's repeated infidelities and neglect. They appeared in public as a couple for the last time during the 1926 World Series. Helen died in January 1929 at age 31 in a fire in a house in Watertown, Massachusetts, owned by Edward Kinder, a dentist with whom she had been living as Mrs. Kinder. In her book, My Dad, the Babe, Dorothy claimed that she was Ruth's biological child by a mistress named Juanita Jennings. In 1918, Juanita, who was at the time very ill, admitted this to Dorothy and Dorothy's sister Julia. On April 17, 1929, 3 months after the death of his first wife, Ruth married actress and model Claire Merritt Hodgson and adopted her daughter Julia. It was the second and final marriage for both parties. Claire, unlike Helen, was well-traveled and educated and put structure into Ruth's life, like Miller Huggins did for him on the field. On July 11, 1914, Ruth arrived in Boston with Egan and Shore. Ruth later told the story of how that morning he had met Helen Woodford, who would become his first wife. She was a 16-year-old waitress at Lander's coffee shop, and Ruth related that she served him when he had breakfast there. Other stories, though, suggest that the meeting occurred on another day and perhaps under other circumstances. Regardless of when he began to court his first wife, he won his first game as a pitcher for the Red Sox that afternoon, 4-3 over the Cleveland Nats. His catcher was Bill Kerrigan, who was also the Red Sox manager. Shore was given a start by Kerrigan the next day. He won that and his second start, and thereafter was pitched regularly. Ruth lost his second start and was thereafter little used. In his major league debut as a batter, Ruth went 0 for 2 against left-hander Willie Mitchell, striking out in his first at-bat before being removed for a pinch hitter in the 7th inning. Ruth was not much noticed by the fans, and Bostonians watched the Red Sox crosstown rival, the Braves, begin a legendary comeback that would take them from the last place on the 4th of July to 1914 World Series championship. Egan was traded to Cleveland after 2 weeks on the Boston roster. During his time with the Red Sox, he kept an eye on the inexperienced Ruth, much as Dunn had in Baltimore. When he was traded, no one took his place as supervisor. Ruth's new teammates considered him brash and would have preferred him as a rookie to remain quiet and inconspicuous. When Ruth insisted on taking batting practice despite being both a rookie who did not play regularly and a pitcher, he arrived to find his bats sawed in half. Ruth had received a raise on promotion to the major leagues and quickly acquired tastes for fine food, liquor, and women, among other temptations. Manager Kerrigan allowed Ruth to pitch 2 exhibition games in mid-August. Although Ruth won both against major league competition, he was not restored to the pitching rotation. It is uncertain why Kerrigan did not give Ruth additional opportunities to pitch. There are legends filmed for the screen in the Babe Ruth story, 1948, that the young pitcher had a habit of signaling his intent to throw a curveball by sticking out his tongue slightly, and that he was easy to hit until this changed. Creamer pointed out that it is common for inexperienced pitchers to display such habits, and the need to break Ruth of his would not constitute a reason to not use him at all. The biographer suggested that Kerrigan was unwilling to use Ruth because of the rookie's poor behavior. On July 30th, 1914, Boston owner Joseph Lannin had purchased the Major League Providence Grays, members of the International League. The Providence team had been owned by several people associated with the Detroit Tigers. including star hitter Ty Cobb. And as part of the transaction, a Providence pitcher was sent to the Tigers to soothe Providence fans upset at losing a star. Lannin announced that the Red Sox would soon send a replacement to the Grays. This was intended to be Ruth, but his departure for Providence was delayed when Cincinnati Reds owner Gary Herman claimed him by waiver. During the 1919 season, Ruth was used as a pitcher in only 17 of his 130 games and compiled a 9-5 record. Barrow used him as a pitcher mostly in the early part of the season when the Red Sox manager still had hopes of a second consecutive pennant. By late June, the Red Sox were clearly out of the race, and Barrow had no objection to Ruth concentrating on his hitting, if only because it drew people to the ballpark. Ruth had hit a home run against the Yankees on opening day and another during a month-long batting slump that soon followed. Relieved of his pitching duties, Ruth began an unprecedented spell of slugging home runs, which gave him widespread public and press attention. 2 home runs by Ruth on July 5th and one in each of 2 consecutive games a week later raised his season total to 11, his career best from 1918. The first record to fall was the American League single-season mark of 16, set by Ralph Sox Siebold in 1902. Ruth matched that on July 29, then pulled ahead towards the Major League record of 25, set by Buck Freeman in 1899. By the time Ruth reached this in early September, writers had discovered that Ned Williamson of the 1884 Chicago White Stockings had hit 27 in a ballpark where the distance to right field was only 215 feet. On September 20th, Babe Ruth Day at Fenway Park, Ruth won the game with a home run in the bottom of the 9th inning, tying Williamson. He broke the record 4 days later against the Yankees at the Polo Grounds and hit one more against the Senators to finish with 29. The home run at Washington made Ruth the first major league player to hit a home run at all 8 ballparks in his league. In spite of Ruth's hitting heroics, the Red Sox finished 6th, 20-plus half games behind the league champion White Sox. In his 6 seasons with Boston, he won 89 games and recorded a 2.19 ERA. He had a 4-year stretch where he was second in the American League in wins and ERA behind Walter Johnson, and Ruth had a winning record against Johnson in head-to-head matchups. The 1919 season saw record-breaking attendance, and Ruth's home runs for Boston made him a natural sensation. In March 1919, Ruth was reported as having accepted a 3-year contract for a total of $27,000 after protracted negotiations. Nevertheless, on December 26, 1919, Frazee sold Ruth's contract to the New York Yankees. Not all the circumstances concerning the sale are known, but Brewer and former Congressman Jacob Ruppert, the New York team's principal owner, reportedly asked Yankee manager Miller Huggins what the team needed to be successful. "Get Ruth from Boston," Huggins reportedly replied, noting that Frazee was in need of money to finance his theatrical productions. An often told story is that Frazee needed money and sold Ruth to finance the musical No No Nanette. That play did not open until 1925, by which time Frazee had sold the Red Sox, but was based on a Frazee-produced play, My Lady Friends, which opened in 1919. There were also other financial pressures on Frazee. Despite his team's success, Ruth, fully aware of baseball's popularity and his role in it, wanted to renegotiate his contract, signed before the 1919 season for $10,000 per year through 1921. He demanded that his salary be doubled, or he would sit out the season and cash in on his popularity through other ventures. Ruth's salary demands were causing other players to ask for more money. Frazee sold the rights to Babe Ruth for $100,000, the largest sum ever paid for a baseball player. The deal also involved a $350,000 loan from Ruppert to Frazee, secured by a mortgage on Fenway Park. Once it was agreed, Frazee informed Barrow, who, stunned, told the owner that he was getting the worst end of the bargain. Cynics have suggested that Barrow may have played a larger role in the Ruth sale, and less than a year after he became the Yankee general manager, and in the following years made a number of purchases of Red Sox players from Frazee. The $100,000 price included $25,000 in cash and notes for the same amount due November 1 in 1920, 1921, and 1922. Ruppert and Houston assisted Frazee in selling the notes to banks for immediate cash. The transaction was contingent on Ruth signing a new contract, which was quickly accomplished. Ruth agreed to fulfill the remaining 2 years on his contract, but was given a $20,000 bonus payable over 2 seasons. The deal was announced on January 6, 1920. Reaction in Boston was mixed. Some fans were embittered at the loss of Ruth. Others conceded that Ruth had become difficult to deal with. The New York Times suggested that the short right field wall at the Polo Grounds should prove an easy target for Ruth next season, and playing 77 games at home, it would be surprising if Ruth surpassed his home run record of 29 circuit clouts next summer. According to Reisler, the Yankees had pulled off the sports steal of the century. The home runs kept on coming. Ruth tied his own record of 29 on July 15 and broke it with home runs in both games of a doubleheader 4 days later. By the end of July, he had 37, but his pace slackened somewhat after that. Nevertheless, on September 4th, he both tied and broke the organized baseball record for home runs in a season, snapping Perry Reardon's 1895 mark of 44 in minor Western League. The Yankees played well as a team, battling for the league lead early in the summer, but slumped in August in the American League pennant battle with Chicago and Cleveland. The pennant and the World Series were won by Cleveland, who surged ahead after the Black Sox scandal broke on September 28th and led to the suspension of many of Chicago's top players, including shoeless Joe Jackson. The Yankees finished third, but drew 1 to 2 million fans to the Polo Ground, the first time a team had drawn a 7-figure attendance. The rest of the league sold 600,000 more tickets. Many fans there to see Ruth, who led the league with 54 home runs, 158 runs, and 137 runs batted in RBIs. In 1920 and afterwards, Ruth was aided in his power hitting by the fact that A.J. Reach Company, the maker of baseballs, used in the major leagues was using a more efficient machine to wind the yarn found within the baseball. The new baseballs went into play in 1920 and ushered the start of the live ball era. The number of home runs across the major leagues increased by 184 over the previous year. Baseball statistician Bill James pointed out that while Ruth was likely aided by the change in the baseball, there were other factors at work, including the gradual abolition of the spitball, accelerated after the death of Ray Chapman, struck by a pitched ball thrown by Willie Mays in August 1920, and the more frequent use of the new baseballs, also a response to Chapman's death. Nevertheless, James theorized that Ruth's 1920 explosion might have happened in 1919 had a full season of 154 games been played rather than 140. Had Ruth refrained from pitching 133 innings that season, and if he were playing at any other home field but Fenway Park, where he hit only 9 of 29 home runs. In the off-season, Ruth spent some time in Havana, Cuba, where he was said to have lost $35,000, equivalent to $620,000 in 2024, betting on horse races. Ruth hit home runs early and often in the 1921 season, during which he broke Roger Connor's mark for home runs in a career, 138. Each of the almost 600 home runs Ruth hit in his career after that exceeded his own record. After a slow start, the Yankees were soon locked in a tight pennant race with Cleveland, winners of the 1920 World Series. On September 15, Ruth hit his 55th home run, breaking his year-old single-season record. In late September, the Yankees visited Cleveland and won 3 out of 4 games, giving them the upper hand in the race, and clinched their first pennant a few days later. Ruth finished the regular season with 59 home runs, batting .378, and with a slugging percentage of .846. Ruth's 177 runs scored, 119 extra base hits, and 457 total bases set modern-era records that still stand as of 2024. The Yankees had high expectations when they met the New York Giants in the 1921 World Series, every game of which was played in the Polo Grounds. The Yankees won the first 2 games with Ruth in the lineup. However, Ruth badly scraped his elbow during Game 2 when he slid into third base. He had walked and stolen both second and third bases. After the game, he was told by the team physician not to play the rest of the series. By this advice, he did play in the next 3 games and hit in Game 8 of the best-of-9 series, but the Yankees lost 5 games to 3. Ruth hit .316, drove in 5 runs, and hit the first World Series home run. Ruth's 1926 salary of $52,000 was far more than any other baseball player, but he made at least twice as much in other income, including $100,000 from 12 weeks of vaudeville. The 1927 New York Yankees team is considered one of the greatest squads to ever take the field, known as Murderers Row because of the power of its lineup. The team clinched first place on Labor Day, won American League record 110 games, and took the American League pennant by 19 games. There was no suspense in the pennant's race, and the nation turned its attention to Ruth of his own single-season home run record of 59 round trippers. Ruth was not alone in this chase. Teammate Lou Gehrig proved to be a slugger who was capable of challenging Ruth for his home run crown. He tied Ruth with 24 home runs late in June. Through July and August, the dynamic duo was never separated by more than 2 home runs. Gehrig took the lead 45-44 in the first game of the doubleheader at Fenway Park early in September. Ruth responded with 2 blasts of his own to take the lead. As it proved permanently, Gehrig finished with 47. Even so, as of September 6, Ruth was still several games off his 1921 pace, and going into the final series against the Senators, had only 57. He hit 2 in the first game of the series, including one off Paul Hopkins, facing his first major league batter to tie the record. The following day, September 30th, he broke it with his 60th homer in the 8th inning off Tom Zachary to break a 2-2 tie. On January 7, 1930, negotiations between the Yankees and Ruth quickly broke down. Having just concluded a 3-year contract at an annual salary of $70,000, Ruth promptly rejected both the Yankees' initial proposal of $70,000 for 1 year and their final offer of 2 years at $75,000, the latter figure equaling the annual salary of then U.S. President Herbert Hoover. Instead, Ruth demanded at least $85,000 in 3 years. When asked why he thought he was worth more than the President of the United States, Ruth responded, "Say, if I hadn't been sick last summer, I'd have broken hell out of that home run record. Besides, the president gets a 4-year contract. I'm only asking for 3. Exactly 2 months later, a compromise was reached, with Ruth settling for 2 years at an unprecedented $80,000 per year. Ruth's salary was more than 2.4 times greater than the next highest salary that season, a record margin as of 2025. In 1934, Ruth played his last full season with the Yankees. By this time, years of high living were starting to catch up with him. His conditioning had deteriorated to the point that he could no longer field or run. He accepted a pay cut to $35,000 from Ruppert, but he was still the highest paid player in the major leagues. He could still handle a bat, recording a .288 batting average with 22 home runs, and on July 13, 1934, he hit his 700th career home run. However, Reisler described these statistics as merely mortal by Ruth's previous standards. Ruth was selected to the American League All-Stars team for the second consecutive year, even though he was in the twilight of his career. During the game, New York Giants pitcher Carl Hubbell struck out Ruth and 4 other future Hall of Famers consecutively. The Yankees finished second again, 7 games behind the Tigers. By this time, Ruth knew he was nearly finished as a player. He desired to remain in baseball as a manager. He was often spoken of as possible candidate as managerial jobs opened up. But in 1932, when he was mentioned as a contender for the Red Sox position, Ruth stated that he was not yet ready to leave the field. There were rumors that Ruth was a likely candidate each time when the Cleveland Indians, Cincinnati Reds, and Detroit Tigers were looking for a manager, but nothing came of them. Just before the 1934 season, Ruppert offered to make Ruth the manager of the Yankees' top minor league team, the New York Bears, but he was talked out of it by his wife Claire and his business manager Christy Walsh. Tigers owner Frank Navin seriously considered acquiring Ruth and making him player manager. However, Ruth insisted on delaying the meeting until he came back from a trip to Hawaii. Navin was unwilling to wait. Ruth opted to go on his trip, despite Barrow advising him that he was making a mistake. In any event, Ruth's asking price was too high for the notoriously tight-fisted Navin. The Tigers' job ultimately went to Mickey Cochran. Early in the 1934 season, Ruth made no secret of his desire to manage the Yankees. However, that job was never a serious possibility. Ruppert always supported McCarthy, who would remain in his position for another 12 seasons. The relationship between Ruth and McCarthy had been lukewarm at best, and Ruth's open campaigning to replace him further chilled their interpersonal relations. By the end of the season, Ruth hinted that he would retire unless Ruppert named him manager of the Yankees. When the time came, Ruppert wanted Ruth to leave the team without drama or hard feelings. While the brainstorming tour was underway, Ruppert began negotiating with Boston Braves owner Judge Emil Fuchs, who wanted Ruth as a gate attraction, but the team drew poorly at the box office. Unable to afford the rent at Braves Field, Fuchs had considered holding dog races there when the Braves were not at home, only to be turned down by Lannin. On February 26, 1935, Ruppert had stated that he would not release Ruth to go to another team as a full-time player. For this reason, it was announced that Ruth would become a team vice president and would be consulted on all club transactions, in addition to playing. He was also made assistant manager to Braves skipper Bill McKechnie. In a long letter to Ruth a few days before the press conference, Fuchs promised Ruth a share in the Braves' profits, with the possibility of becoming a co-owner of the team. Fuchs also raised the possibility of Ruth succeeding McKechnie as manager, perhaps as early as 1936. Ruppert called the deal the greatest opportunity Ruth ever had. By the end of the first month of the season, Ruth concluded he was finished even as a part-time player. As early as May 12th, he asked Fuchs to let him retire. Ultimately, Fuchs persuaded Ruth to remain at least until after the Memorial Day doubleheader in Philadelphia. In the interim was a Western road trip, at which the rival team had scheduled days to honor him. In Chicago and St. Louis, Ruth performed poorly, and his batting average sank, with only 2 additional home runs for a total of 3 on the season. In the first 2 games in Pittsburgh, Ruth had only 1 hit, though a long fly caught by Paul Wainer probably would have been a home run in any other ballpark besides Forbes Field. Ruth played in the 3rd game of the Pittsburgh series on May 25, 1935, and added 1 more tail to his playing legend. Ruth went 4 for 4, including 3 home runs, though the Braves lost the game 11-7. The last 2 were off Ruth's old Cubs nemesis, Guy Bush. The final home run, both of the game and of Ruth's career, sailed out of the park over the right field upper deck of the first time anyone had hit a fair ball completely out of Forbes Field. Ruth was urged to make this his last game, but he had given his word to Fuchs to stay on through Memorial Day and played in Cincinnati and Philadelphia. The first game of the doubleheader in Philadelphia, the Braves lost both. Ruth retired on June 2nd after a argument with Fuchs. As early as the war years, doctors had cautioned Ruth to take better care of his health, and he grudgingly followed their advice, limiting his drinking and not going on a proposed trip to support the troops in the South Pacific. In 1946, Ruth began experiencing severe pain over his left eye and had difficulty swallowing. In November 1946, Ruth entered French Hospital in New York for tests, which revealed that he had an inoperable malignant tumor at the base of his skull and in his neck. On June 13, Ruth visited Yankee Stadium for the final time in his life, appearing at the 25th anniversary celebration of the house that Ruth built. By this time, he had lost much weight and had difficulty walking. Introduced along with his surviving teammates from 1923, Ruth used a bat as a cane. On August 16, 1948, at 8:01 p.m., Babe Ruth died in his sleep at the age of 53. Thousands of New Yorkers, including many children, stood vigil outside the hospital during Ruth's final days. Ruth was not just a power hitter, he was a Yankees' best bunter and an excellent outfielder. Ruth's penchant for hitting home runs altered how baseball is played. Prior to 1920, home runs were unusual, and managers tried to win games by getting the runner on base and bringing him around to score through such means as the stolen base, the bunt, and the hit and run. Advocates of what was dubbed inside baseball, such as Giants manager McGraw, disliked the home run, considering it a blot on the purity of the game. According to sports writer W.A. Helen, after the 1920 season, Ruth's breakout performance that season and the response in excitement and attendance settled for all time to come that the American public is nuttier over home run than the clever fielding or the hitless pitching. Viva el home run, and 2 times Viva Babe Ruth, exponent of the home run. Bill James states, when the owners discovered that the fans liked to see home runs and when the foundations of the games were simultaneously imperiled by disgrace in the Black Sox scandal, then there was no turning back. While a few, such as McGraw and Cobb, decried passing of the old-style play, teams quickly began to seek and develop sluggers. According to sports writer Grantland Rice, only 2 sports figures of the 1920s approached Ruth in popularity: boxer Jack Dempsey and racehorse Man o' War. His funeral service took place over 3 days. His open casket was placed on display in the rotunda of Yankee Stadium, where it remained for 2 days. 77,000 people filed past to pay him tribute. His Requiem Mass was celebrated by Francis Cardinal Spillman at St. Patrick's Cathedral. A crowd estimated at 75,000 waited outside. Ruth is buried with his second wife Claire on a hillside in Section 25 at the Gate of Heaven Cemetery in Hawthorne, New York. On April 19, 1949, the Yankees unveiled a granite monument in Ruth's honor in center field of Yankee Stadium. The monument was located in the field of play next to a flagpole and similar tributes to Huggins and Garrick until the stadium was remodeled from 1974 to 75, which resulted in the outfield fences moving inward and enclosing the monument from the playing field. This area was known thereafter as Monument Park. Yankee Stadium, the house that Ruth built, was replaced after the 2008 season with a new Yankee Stadium across the street from the old one. Monument Park was subsequently moved to the new venue behind the center field fence. Ruth's uniform number 3 has been retired by the Yankees, and he is one of 5 Yankee players or managers to have a granite monument within the stadium.